Manor.
Do you need to sell your horror novel to horror fans? Perhaps you're an independent artist who's looking to connect with future customers. Perhaps you have a horror podcast or merchandise to offer. Whatever horror genre product or service you have, you can reach your target audience around the world by becoming a Manor sponsor. It's both easy and affordable. The current rates are the lowest they'll ever be. But hurry, they won't remain that low forever. Get started by sending an email to contact@manorhq.com for current rates and more information. Once again, that email address is contact@manorhq.com. Become a Manor sponsor today.
Follow Manor online and on social media. You can find Manor on Twitter @OfficialManor, on Instagram @Manor Entertainment, on YouTube @Manor Entertainment, and on the official website address manorhq.com. As always, share with others and spread the word.
Warning. The following program may contain violence, explicit language, sexual situations, and dark content, unsuitable for some listeners. It is intended for mature audiences only. Discretion is advised.
Presented in cinematic audio.
God, is it ever dry in this country?
It's Ireland, dear.
Go on, say it.
Say what?
We should have gone to Majorca.
We should have gone to Majorca.
You're enjoying rubbing this in, aren't you?
I'm enjoying being out of the unrelenting precipitation and sipping my whiskey. One of the few things this damp bog isle is good for. You should try some. It's quite good.
Bit early for me, thanks. I don't fancy facing into dinner half tipsy. I'll heat myself up some other way. I'm going to the bar for a cappuccino. I don't suppose you'll be wanting anything. You've enough there to keep you going for a while.
I'm quite all right, thanks.
Harriet was at the point of rising to her feet when a waitress passed by their little nook.
Excuse me?
The waitress appeared around their corner.
Yes?
Harriet picked up her half-drunk tomato juice and held it toward the waitress.
Take this to the bar and bring me a cappuccino, please.
The waitress looked at the glass as she took it from Harriet.
Is it not good?
Julian, who'd been looking out a nearby window at a group of golfers playing determinedly through the rain, looked up at the sound of the thick East European accent. The waitress was small and slight, with dark sallow skin and a thick head of shiny black hair.
No, it's fine. I just want something warm to drink.
Yes, madam.
The waitress nodded and placed a glass on her serving platter.
Are you from Kosovo?
The waitress looked down at Julian and blinked.
Yes.
Julian nodded.
I thought I recognized the accent. I served there with NATO during the war.
The waitress nodded.
That was a painful time for my country.
Yes, it was a terrible conflict indeed.
Sorry, madam. I will get you your cappuccino.
The waitress headed off toward the bar.
This country is full of foreigners.
Julian let out a snort that had a touch of laughter about it.
No more so than ours.
I know, but the blacks and the Asians have been with us since forever. The East Europeans seem to have just mushroomed up out of nowhere in this country. When we were here 5 years ago, they were hardly here at all.
A moment of silence fell between them.
I just can't warm to the Poles, the Estonians and all the others. They've got this very gangstery air about them.
Julian looked at his wife. Her face was wrinkled in distaste.
And that one,
Harriet continued, nodding down the hallway the waitress had taken.
she even had a tattoo.
Where?
On her wrist, a horrible little thing peeping out from under her sleeve. Ugh!
Julian took another sip of his whiskey, grateful to have it. He'd only been retired from the army for 6 months, and already he was finding it hard going, having so much time to spend with his wife. Christ, but she complained so much. Her phone beeped, and Harriet unzipped her handbag. A mini wave of relief coursed through Julian, something to distract her from her vein of form.
Felicity and Pauline are shopping in Knightsbridge. It's lashing out of the heavens over there, too.
So we're not alone in our misery.
Eventually, the waitress returned, a steaming mug of cappuccino on her platter with a few small bags of sugar. Harriet put her phone back in her handbag and placed the bag under her chair behind her legs, just in case the waitress attempted a robbery in broad daylight, Julian supposed.
Finally! I was beginning to wonder what was taking so long.
My apologies, madam.
She placed the mug on the table before Harriet, who sighed.
You forgot to spoon.
The waitress looked embarrassed and contrite.
Sorry, madam. I will get it at once.
Hurry up!
Yes, madam.
As the waitress turned to leave, Julian extended his now empty whiskey tumbler to her.
Actually, I'll have one of those as well.
The waitress nodded.
Yes, sir.
Then she was gone.
I'll bet you won't have long to wait now that I've spoken up.
A dull wave of anger flitted through Julian, and he sighed softly. With the bad weather and the below-par service, he knew his wife was primed for the rest of the day. Until dinner, at least, when a glass or two of wine, if she had them, might take some of her edge off. A year earlier, Julian had been dodging RPGs in the tribal areas of Pakistan. For a second, he found himself wondering if maybe he'd been a little better off then than he was now. Feeling his mind wander, he looked out the window again. The rain was easing up somewhat, but there was no sign of the clouds dissipating. The golfers he'd seen earlier were still out on the course, their clothes flapping in the breeze. Suddenly, in his mind's eye, Julian saw himself lying on a beautiful island beach. A shimmering blanket of green water before him, a glorious, cloudless sky above him, from which the sun beamed down upon his bronzed form. And beside him, a beautiful woman, not his harping, whinging wife, of course, but, yes, his daughter Felicity's friend, Amber. Her achingly sweet body, brown and shining.
Here you go, madam.
The waitress returned and placed a spoon on the table before Harriet. The waitress's sleeve rode up a little, and Julian spotted the tattoo on her wrist. It was a wheel. Julian immediately recognized it as the 16-spoke chakra representing the traveling heritage of the Romani people. Julian's cappuccino mug slid off the side of the waitress's platter and crashed onto the table.
Ah!
Julian yelped in agony as the burning fluid splashed his hand and drenched his trouser knee.
Oh, sir, I am so sorry.
You imbecile!
You stupid fucking gypsy.
Well, don't just stand there. Get some towels.
Julian looked up, and what he saw made him blink. He found himself staring into the eyes of the waitress, but to Julian, it was like a different person stood before him now. Gone was the keen-to-please girl of earlier. In her place was a woman with nothing but cold steel in her gaze. The waitress showed no sign of complying with Harriet's order, remaining rooted to where she stood.
Did you hear what I told you? I said get some...
The waitress snapped her head toward Harriet.
Be quiet.
Harriet went silent, a shocked look on her face. The waitress looked back at Julian.
You want to be on an island, yes?
Julian stared at her, dumbfounded. It was a few seconds before he could manage a word.
How?
Then so be it.
In a low voice, she began speaking in a language that Julian didn't understand.
Alisa, I am the...
His stomach rolled, but he'd heard something like it before, hadn't he? Yes, in Kosovo. He'd been drinking with some army colleagues in a back alley bar in Pristina when an old gypsy woman had come up to their table selling trinkets. Having had a little too much to drink, one of the officers at the table, a Lieutenant Willis, had kicked her and shoved her away with his boot, and she'd fallen to the ground. As Julian and his colleagues had laughed at the woman's misfortune, Willis had added insult to injury by rising to his feet and proceeding to urinate on the woman as she tried to right herself. When Willis had gone dry, he'd sat down again, beaming with pride and alcohol. As he laughed and continued with his drink, the old woman had risen to her knees, her eyes fixed on Willis, speaking in a language that none of them had recognized. The following morning, Willis had complained of finding urination quite painful. His problem had intensified over the ensuing days to a point when he wept with dread at having to go to the toilet, shrieking through the experience. Doctors had been baffled by the condition, finding nothing wrong with him. After a fortnight of hell, Willis's torment had finally begun to abate. As he gazed transfixed at the waitress who was still speaking before him, Julian began to feel nauseous. All the strength seemed to be draining from his muscles. The floor seemed to be rising toward him, and then it began to swim before his eyes. The waitress's voice was nothing but a dull, muddy, reverberating tone now. He went to turn his head toward Harriet, but midway through the action, everything went black.
Julian! Julian!
Harriet, shrieking beside him.
Julian, we're sinking! Julian!
Julian looked down. Christ, what was he standing on? Crystal logs of some kind? He looked around him. Yes, whatever they were on, they were sinking all right. They were surrounded by a strange white substance that they seemed to be going down through.
Julian!
His wife, her voice close to breaking now, he imagined. Her screaming was so loud. Movement caused him to look up. What he saw almost caused his bladder to loosen. Two giant eyes were gazing down at him. Eyes set in a vast, sallow face. Beneath the massive dark orbs was a cruelly smiling mouth that to him seemed the length of a cruise ship. With dawning horror, the realization of where he was began to rise within Julian in a dreadful swelling wave. He looked behind him frantically. His fear became almost disabling when he saw the chair he'd occupied only a few moments before, now towering over him like some bizarre colossus from a science fiction movie. Christ, no! It can't be, he panicked. No, it's just a dream, just a nightmare. He'll wake up any second now. But he didn't. This was reality, all right. He was in his own cappuccino mug. Harriet's screaming took on a new and terrible intensity. Hearing agony now on top of terror, Julian looked sideways. Harriet's side of the sugar log island was sinking beneath the brown fluid of the cappuccino, and his wife's legs below her knees were immersed in the liquid. The fluid was steaming, its heat almost too much for Julian to bear. Suddenly, his screaming wife was up to her waist in the fluid. Her face was redder than the worst sunburn she'd ever endured. Ignoring her outstretched arms, Julian looked about him. He knew he only had seconds, if even that. He had to make a break for the white stuff that surrounded him. The foamed milk his close-to-breaking mind clarified. And then the sugar beneath him went under. He screamed as the searing fluid rose quickly toward his knees and then beyond. Roaring in pain, he looked sideways to see his wife, her face purple and blistered from the appalling steam heat, disappear beneath the brown. As the roasting liquid seared his genitals and continued upward, Julian's last thought was that he could feel his legs actually dissolving away. Then, there was nothing. The waitress waited for the last of the sugar to slip beneath the surface of the cappuccino before lifting the mug from the table. She put it on her platter and did the same with Harriet's mug. She took them to the kitchen and poured them down the sink. 2 tiny blobs clung to the sinkhole after she'd emptied the second mug, and she used the handle of a knife to break them up. Humming, she turned on the tap and washed the remnants away. Then, she went back out to the bar.
You've been listening to Manor House, Episode 16, Sweet Retirement, presented in cinematic audio. Subscribe to this show and leave a rating, a review, and general feedback wherever you're receiving this program. Share with others on social media and at home. Your feedback, as well as sharing with others, helps grow and continue future productions. Credits. This episode was originally recorded and produced in 2015. Performances by RWTN as Julian, Tisha Boone as Harriet, Rock Capuano as Gypsy Waitress. Story by John Leahy. Directed, produced, edited, and scripted by Rock Capuano. Music and sound design provided by Edo SFX. Additional music by Luke Whitehead. Theme song by Alan Postscript, based on The Shining by the Angelas. Cover art by Revel. Special thanks to Luke Whitehead. Manor House was created by Rock Capuano. Manor House is a Manor Entertainment production. The story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious. No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, and products is intended or should be inferred. This production is property of Manor Entertainment, LLC. No portion of this production may be reproduced or used by any means without the proper written consent of Manor Entertainment, LLC. This production is protected under the copyright laws of the United States and other countries throughout the world. Country of first publication, United States of America. Any unauthorized exhibition, distribution, or copying of this production, or any part thereof, may result in civil liability and criminal prosecution. Copyright 2019, Manor Entertainment, LLC. Manor.